I'm Tricia Sheehan. I'm with Dairy Management Inc., and I work in our Farmer Relations and Outreach team. And I'm happy to be here today to talk a little bit about handling difficult questions and to help you guys figure out some tips and techniques that you guys can employ as you're getting into using difficult questions and speaking with different groups. I often hear that public speaking is called out as the number one phobia by a lot of people. But I think that difficult questions is probably right there in that second spot. And it can be something that intimidates people. So we're here today to talk about some tips and techniques to be able to help you work through those situations so that those questions maybe don't feel quite as difficult or quite as intimidating as they sometimes do. Think about some of those tough questions, right? There are all sorts of topics and different pieces that come out there that people get asked about that can be tough questions. But I think the number one key when you're thinking about questions and how to be out there and answering them is to be as prepared as you possibly can be, right? Thinking about those questions and thinking about these and preparing for things ahead of time is what can make this not feel quite so intimidating and a little bit easier in the scope of things. So, we're going to talk through some of those ways that you can be, hopefully, feel a little bit more prepared and ready to answer difficult questions. So, we've got some different principles that we have here on the screen for handling tough questions. And we're going to spend some time going through each of these different principles, but wanted you to see that full scope from the very beginning before we jump into them. I've got a sample question here coming in from Heather. Heather is asking, what happens to bull calves on your farm? So right away, we don't really know much about Heather. She could be stopping by at your farm tomorrow for a tour. She may be just answering this question or asking this question online. So what's the number one thing that you should do first? We want to investigate and try find out a little bit more information, right? Is Heather coming from, a place where she knows a lot about dairy? Has she been on farms before? Maybe she's got somebody in her family that is a farmer. We don't really know. So being able to take a step back and think about what more can we learn about Heather before we jump in and try answer that question for her is a good first step. So here again is the question that Heather has asked is, what happens to bull calves on your farm? So we've learned a little bit more about Heather, and we find out that she's the mom of 2 young children. She does like to share recipes online, including some that are dairy friendly. So that gives us a little bit of background on Heather. She's maybe not an anti-dairy person if she's sharing some dairy friendly recipes, but she doesn't maybe have a lot of farm background to go on either. So having this little bit of information about Heather, whether you found it out because you've looked up her online, whether you've asked her about her background as she's standing there on your operation, just gives you a little bit more insight into her before you jump in and start answering the question. The other piece that you may want to think about is just what is the context? Where is this question coming from? Is there information that maybe she's heard from someone else? Is there information that maybe she read about online and that's why she's asking the question? But trying to get some context around the question is a second piece that we would like to try do when we're looking at how we're answering some of these difficult questions. Once you've jumped in and you've gotten a little bit more information, then it's time to really focus on answering the question, right? So what we would want to do is find some common ground. Look for some shared values that you may have in common with Heather. Maybe you have a family, you have young kids or young grandkids, so you might have some interesting insights that you can share with Heather, you can talk about to kind of set the stage and start out on that common ground. You also want to make sure that, you know that you may not agree on things. You may not have all of the specific answers. Now, this particular question about bull calves on your farm, I'm hoping that you'll be able to answer that one fairly easily, right? But some other questions may pop up, and it's okay to let them know that you might not be able to answer every single question, but you've got the right contacts, you've got the right people that you can connect people to, that they may be the better person to answer that question, to really fill them in and give them the right insight that they're looking for. As you start to think about responding and answering their questions, I want to make sure that you respond with empathy, right? At times, it can feel like these questions, especially like Heather's I used in that example, you they can be attacking, and it may force you to think about being defensive right from the get go. And that's something that we want to make sure that we're trying to um, keep out of um, our initial reaction, right? Respond with empathy. A lot of times people are asking these questions because they really just don't know, right? They haven't been around a farm, they haven't been around animals, and so they may hear something from a friend of theirs, they may have read something online, and the fact that they're getting a chance to interact with a farmer and to learn more about farming and dairy farming, they may have a lot of questions. And so being able to respond with empathy and not to be defensive from the get go is an important piece to answering tough questions. As I said before, you don't have to know all the answers. As one question is answered, they may come back with another and a third and a fourth. And that's great because you really want them to learn more and to be able to learn as they go and to learn directly from you, who is an expert in this area. So, but knowing that you can call on other people, that you can put them in touch with somebody else. So maybe not right at that second, but that you can connect them with somebody else to answer those questions and to broaden the experience further is great. Another key piece that I want to remind you about is to, not to shy away from your expertise and your experiences. That's why they're coming to you for these with these questions and to look for answers, right? Knowing with your experience, sharing your experience, the expertise that you have is what they're looking for. Another key piece when answering difficult questions is to know when to stop talking, right? Tough questions can be difficult, and you want to try get out as much information as you can. But I would say kind of the opposite is true, right? When you're thinking about some of these different topics and questions that come in, think about what is that key message that you want to deliver. Maybe there's one supporting point to that key message. But then the next key piece is to make that statement, answer their question, use your key message, and stop talking. You may have to learn to embrace the silence, which can be challenging, but once you've delivered your message and what the talking point that you want to use, don't try to just keep fumbling with words and keep going and keep going. Make your key statement, stop, pause, take a breath. Hopefully, then they'll come back with a question after that versus you trying to keep going and talk more and more in depth on a topic that may be difficult or challenging. At the beginning of this, I talked about, that we want to make you feel as prepared and as confident as you can be to make these questions come out and be less difficult and less intimidating as you're working through the answers. And one way to think about what questions, you know, to be more prepared is to think about these questions that could come up and really sit down and write down some notes. So if you're planning for a farm tour next week, think about the group that's coming and some of the questions that they may have and talk about, write down what are the questions that you think could come up. What are the questions you think they will ask? What are the questions that you hope they don't ask? Write all those questions down and then spend some time and write down some answers to them. They don't have to be full blown answers, but it can be your top couple of points that you would like to get across with each question. At the end of your question, make sure that you thank them for the time that they've spent with you. Hopefully you've given them the right information that they're looking for, but thanking them for the time and the curiosity that they've had in asking you questions is great. Give them your contact information if they have more questions in the future. It's another way to just establish that relationship and allow you to be that expert for them if they've got questions down the road. One of the things that we want to talk about is the ABCs as you're working through some of these difficult questions, right? So we've got this little cheat sheet right here on the screen. So the ABCs that I'm talking about are to acknowledge that question. You want to bridge into what the answer is that you want to deliver and then communicate that information. So here are some tips that you could use, when you're getting asked a tough question. If you want to think about it a little bit more as you're formulating your answer, you can use some of these acknowledgement statements. But these are some good phrases to help you as you're thinking about that question that's been asked and you're processing it, using some of these phrases to acknowledge what they've asked, bridging over to what you want to talk about, and then hitting on your key message points. So I think that if you can remember the ABC in answering some of these difficult questions, that'll at least give you a few minutes to help think about a response, but then get those key messages that hopefully you've outlined and prepared for in advance. Let's give you a little bit of thinking and talking through some real world scenarios that I know are often asked of farmers in today's day. So we've got another example of a question. Rebecca Luke here is asking, why is milk being pushed so hard if so many people are lactose intolerant? We hear this comment a lot in the dairy industry. So if I was asked this question, one of the things that I would say, I am not a nutritionist, but I can answer this question because I am somebody who's familiar with dairy and can help them understand a little bit more there. So if Rebecca's asking me why milk is being pushed so hard, my response would be, you know what? We get asked that question a lot. But the truth is that people have been drinking milk for thousands of years because it has the superior nutritional value that people need and desire in their diets. Now, one of the great things about dairy is because we have so many different choices, right? There are many different dairy products and there are many different lactose-free products that people, if they do have lactose issues, they have choices and they have options that are available to them so that they can still get so much of that nutrition, but then not have to worry about the lactose issues that may be something personal to them. So again, I just want to pop these principles that we have for tough questions up here so that you can remind yourself about asking those clarifying questions. I didn't do that in this case. I just jumped in with my answer because I've talked to Rebecca before, so I knew where she was coming from. But trying to be able to use some of these principles will be helpful as you're working through some of these questions that you potentially could be asked. I've got another question from Tom. Tom is visiting your farm on a tour, and Tom's heard a lot about the environment, right? It's something that he mentioned when he first got to your farm today, that, he's heard a lot of negativity about agriculture and farming and what it does. And he's trying to learn a little bit more, which is why he's come to your tour, your farm tour today. So his question is about how much GHGs does your farm's cows contribute to the environment? He's heard that farms are more harmful to the environment than cars on the road. So if I were asked a question like this, and it sounds like he's coming from kind of that negative mindset, I may start it off with something and say, you know what? Are farms bad for the environment? I think the opposite is true, right? Farmers have been working on preserving the environment for years. In my farm here, I took over this farm from my father. I'm hoping to pass this down to future generations. I live here on this farm too. So I am doing everything that I can to make it safe and preserve it for my future as well as, my family's future. So we are not trying to take away from the environment. We're trying to protect the environment and doing everything that we can be to be more sustainable than we were yesterday. Everything that we are looking at doing on our farm, whether it's changing our practices, refining things, is really to make sure that we are preserving the environment and taking care of the land, because we hope to have a strong future here as well. So again, this was just a short little question and answer to show you a little bit about how you can take some of these techniques and use them as you're preparing and working through your answering difficult questions, whether it be on a farm tour, a meeting that you're going to, or a presentation that you may be doing down the road. There are a number of different resources for you as you're working to prepare your presentation, or even to getting ready to answer difficult questions. Your local checkoff can give you talking points, can help you walk through questions that you may have and develop talking points that are specific to your organization or your farm. They would love to do that. I would love to help you out if you need that as well. The other resource that I want to point out to you is we do have the usdairy.com website. There's a lot of information on this website. There's information on nutrition, sustainability, dairy farming in the community. There's a lot of different backgrounders that are up there, different articles that can be used that talk about a lot of the topics that are coming up in today's day and age. Well, that's one of the goals of this website, is to try and have those answers that people may have if people are searching online. But it's also a good resource for you to look at if you're trying to answer questions that you're getting from people in your community, your friends, your family. You can find a lot of good information at the usdairy.com website. So I encourage you to take a look at that website and check it out, but then also to reach out to your local checkoff team as well. They're happy to help you as you're working through any of these tough questions that you're looking for information on, so that you can be better prepared to answer them on your own as well. Thank you for taking time to listen to this presentation on answering difficult or tough questions. I hope we gave you a few tips or techniques that will be helpful for you as you're working through planning and preparing for presentations and questions and answering on your farm or in your community. If you've got questions down the road, feel free to reach out to your local checkoff or reach out to me. We're happy to help you, and we wish you all the best as you prepare for your presentations. Thank you.